Picture this. You're in the most expensive hotel suite in Chicago, watching a $6.2 billion deal crumble before your eyes. Tensions are so high you could cut them with a knife. Two of the most powerful business empires in the world are on the verge of walking away from each other forever. And then, the person cleaning the bathroom speaks up in perfect Arabic and changes everything. What happened next will completely reshape how you think about the people around you that you never really notice. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The 42nd floor of the Chicago Ritz-Carlton had never hosted a business meeting quite like this one. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Imperial Suite, Lake Michigan stretched endlessly toward the horizon, but nobody in the room was admiring the view. The atmosphere was suffocating. Sheikh Rashid bin Khalifa Al-Thani sat rigidly in his chair, his traditional white thobe a stark contrast to the modern business suits surrounding him. His dark eyes held barely contained frustration as he listened to another attempted explanation from the American delegation. This was supposed to be the crown jewel of international business partnerships, a revolutionary clean energy project that would transform the American Midwest. Instead, it had become a nightmare of miscommunication and cultural misunderstanding. Across the polished mahogany conference table, Marcus Richardson, CEO of Richardson Energy Consortium, loosened his tie for what felt like the 100th time that day. 4 days. 4 excruciating days of negotiations that were supposed to have been a formality. The preliminary agreements had been signed months ago. The due diligence was complete. This was meant to be the final handshake before announcing the largest renewable energy investment in Illinois history. But everything that could go wrong had gone wrong. Sheikh Al-Thani, Marcus began, his voice strained with the effort of maintaining diplomatic composure. I believe we can find a middle ground on the regulatory oversight clause. Our legal team has prepared 3 alternative structures that should address your concerns about. The Sheikh raised his hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. But instead of the Oxford-accented English he had been using for 4 days, he switched to rapid, heated Arabic, addressing his team of advisors directly. The change in the room was immediate and electric. The Sheikh's advisors leaned in, responding in equally animated Arabic. Their voices overlapped in what was clearly a heated debate about the Americans sitting just feet away from them. Hand gestures became more pronounced, voices rose, and the Americans sat frozen, completely excluded from a conversation about their own deal. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Richardson Energy's head of international relations, exchanged a worried glance with her colleague. She had witnessed difficult negotiations before, but this felt different. This felt final. The 2 professional translators Richardson had flown in from New York, both with impeccable credentials from the State Department, were struggling visibly. Their faces were pale as they tried to keep up with the rapid-fire Arabic, the regional dialect, and what appeared to be highly technical financial terminology that didn't translate cleanly. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he watched 24 months of preparation potentially evaporating in real time. This wasn't just about money, though the numbers were staggering. The Sheikh's Dubai-based investment fund was prepared to inject $6.2 billion into a network of solar farms and wind installations across 5 Midwestern states. The project would create over 30,000 jobs, establish the United States as a leader in clean energy innovation, and generate enough renewable power to supply nearly 3 million homes. But it was more than economics. This deal represented Marcus's vision of bridging 2 worlds, American innovation and Middle Eastern capital, in service of something larger than profit. At 62, after building Richardson Energy from a small Chicago startup into a multinational corporation, this was meant to be his legacy project. The Sheikh's voice grew sharper, more insistent. His chief advisor, a thin man with silver-rimmed glasses, was shaking his head emphatically while pointing at documents spread across the table. Another advisor held up his hands in what appeared to be frustration, speaking in quick, clipped sentences that made the American translators wince. "What are they saying?" Marcus whispered urgently to the lead translator, a distinguished woman named Patricia Hawkins, who had facilitated international negotiations for over 2 decades. Patricia's face was flushed with professional embarrassment. "I'm getting the general sentiment, Mr. Richardson, but they're using very specific financial terminology, and there are cultural references I'm not entirely familiar with. The dialect is more complex than what we prepared for." The second translator, a younger man named David Park, leaned over and added quietly, "They seem to be discussing withdrawal options and something about trust mechanisms that I can't quite parse." The Sheikh appears to be questioning fundamental assumptions about the partnership structure. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Withdrawal options. After 4 days of what he thought were productive negotiations, after months of preliminary agreements and relationship building, they were discussing walking away. The Sheikh's youngest advisor, a man who couldn't have been older than 30, suddenly stood up from the table. He gathered a stack of documents and spoke directly to Sheikh Al-Thani in what sounded like a formal declaration. Even without understanding Arabic, everyone in the room could sense the gravity of what was being said. Sheikh Al-Thani nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to Marcus, switching back to English with deliberate formality. "Mr. Richardson, I believe we have reached an impasse. There appear to be fundamental disagreements about the governance structure and risk allocation that cannot be resolved within the current framework." The words hit the room like a physical blow. Dr. Mitchell actually gasped audibly. Marcus's chief financial officer, Robert Chen, went pale and began frantically shuffling through papers as if he could find some magical solution in the contract language. "Sheikh Al-Thani," Marcus said, fighting to keep his voice steady, "surely we can work through these concerns. We've come so far together, the project itself is sound. The environmental impact will be transformational. Perhaps if we could have our teams examine specific clauses." "The technical aspects of the project are not in question," the Sheikh interrupted, his tone final. "The issue is trust, Mr. Richardson. Trust in partnership structures. Trust in long-term commitment. Trust in mutual respect for different approaches to business relationships." He gestured toward his team, who were already beginning to pack their documents into leather briefcases. "In our culture, a handshake means something permanent. A commitment is a bond that transcends market fluctuations or political changes. What I have seen over these 4 days suggests a different philosophy. A more flexible approach to partnership obligations." Marcus felt desperation creeping into his voice. "That's not true, Sheikh. We are absolutely committed to this partnership for the long term. Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about our intentions, about the contract language, about—" "There has indeed been a misunderstanding," the Sheikh agreed, rising from his chair with the dignity of someone accustomed to commanding rooms full of powerful people. "And after extensive discussion with my advisors, we have concluded that these misunderstandings reflect deeper incompatibilities that cannot be bridged through revised contract language." The room fell into stunned silence. Through the window, Chicago's skyline glittered in the afternoon sun, oblivious to the collapse happening on the 42nd floor. Marcus could hear the faint sound of traffic 40 floors below, the normal rhythm of a city going about its business while his world fell apart. Dr. Mitchell made one last attempt. "Sheikh Al-Thani, if you could help us understand specifically what concerns remain, perhaps we could address them directly. We have tremendous flexibility in our approach, and we're committed to finding solutions that work for everyone." The Sheikh paused at the head of the table, considering her words. For a moment, Marcus dared to hope, but then the Sheikh shook his head with what appeared to be genuine sadness. "Dr. Mitchell, the concerns are not about contract details. They are about fundamental approaches to partnership and trust. When two parties cannot understand each other at that level." He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. As the Sheikh's team continued packing their materials, Marcus felt the weight of failure settling on his shoulders, not just professional failure, but something deeper. He had genuinely believed this project could demonstrate that business could bridge cultural divides while addressing global challenges, that American entrepreneurship and Middle Eastern capital could create something beneficial for everyone. Instead, they couldn't even communicate clearly enough to maintain a basic negotiation. The Sheikh was moving toward the door when the most unexpected thing happened. A voice from the corner of the suite spoke up in clear, confident Arabic. "Your Excellency, if I may respectfully suggest, there may have been some translation errors that have contributed to this misunderstanding." Every person in that room, American and Arab alike, froze and turned toward the source of the voice. It had come from a man in a hotel maintenance uniform, who had been quietly working near the suite's impressive wet bar, replacing burned-out bulbs in the custom lighting fixtures. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The silence that followed was unlike anything Marcus Richardson had ever experienced in 30 years of high-level business negotiations. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of absolute stillness that occurs when the entire universe seems to pause and recalibrate. Every eye in the Imperial Suite was now focused on a man who, until that moment, had been completely invisible to everyone in the room. He stood near the wet bar, still holding a small LED bulb in one hand and a screwdriver in the other, wearing the standard-issue navy blue maintenance uniform of the Ritz-Carlton, Chicago. His name tag read Daniel Martinez in simple block letters. Daniel was perhaps 35 years old, with the kind of quiet confidence that comes from competence rather than arrogance. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and his brown eyes held an intelligence that none of the executives had bothered to notice during the 4 days he had been unobtrusively maintaining the suite's various systems. Sheikh Rashid bin Khalifa Al-Thani recovered first, his diplomatic training overriding his surprise. He studied Daniel with the sharp attention of someone accustomed to quickly assessing people's capabilities and motivations. When he responded, it was in Arabic, his voice carrying both curiosity and a hint of skepticism. "You speak the language of my people?" the Sheikh asked, using a formal register that tested Daniel's fluency. "Yes, Your Excellency," Daniel replied in flawless Arabic, his accent carrying subtle indications of education rather than casual acquisition. "I could not help but overhear your discussion with your advisors. I believe the American translators may have missed some crucial nuances in your concerns about the partnership structure." The Sheikh's chief advisor, who had been in the process of closing his briefcase, stopped mid-motion. He exchanged a meaningful look with his colleague, and Marcus could see recognition dawning on their faces. Not of Daniel personally, but of something in his manner of speaking, his choice of formal expressions, his understanding of protocol. Marcus felt his world tilting on its axis. For 4 days, this maintenance worker had been present during their most sensitive discussions. He had been replacing air filters, adjusting thermostats, checking electrical systems, refilling ice machines, all while apparently understanding every word of the complex negotiations that were now collapsing around them. Robert Chen, Marcus's CFO, found his voice first among the Americans. "Excuse me," he said, his tone mixing confusion with a hint of alarm, "but you work for the hotel, correct? In what capacity are you qualified to comment on our business discussions?" Daniel set down his tools carefully on the marble bar top and turned to face the room fully. There was no trace of defensiveness in his manner, just the calm assurance of someone who knew exactly where he stood. "I apologize for the interruption," he said, switching seamlessly to English with an accent that was distinctly American, educated, and professional. "You're correct that I work for the hotel. I've been responsible for maintaining the systems in this suite for the past 4 days while you've conducted your negotiations." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "However, I also hold a master's degree in international business from Northwestern University, with a specialization in Middle Eastern commercial law and Islamic finance principles. I spent 6 years working in Dubai and Abu Dhabi before returning to Chicago." The statement hung in the air like a challenge to everything the people in that room thought they understood about their world. Dr. Sarah Mitchell actually took a step backward, as if the revelation had physical force. Sheikh Al-Thani leaned forward in his chair, his earlier frustration replaced by intense interest. "You worked in the Gulf region in what capacity?" "I was a senior analyst with Emirates NBD's Islamic Investment Division," Daniel replied, still speaking English so the Americans could follow. "I specialized in structuring Sharia-compliant international partnerships, particularly in renewable energy projects. I also spent 2 years with the Dubai International Financial Center Authority, helping establish regulatory frameworks for cross-border Islamic finance." Marcus felt his legs go weak. This man, this hotel maintenance worker who had been invisible to them for 4 days, was describing exactly the kind of expertise they had been desperately lacking in their negotiations. "How is that possible?" Dr. Mitchell asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "How does someone with those qualifications end up working hotel maintenance?" Daniel's expression flickered with something that might have been pain, but he answered matter-of-factly. "The 2018 diplomatic tensions between the U.S. and several Gulf states resulted in significant restrictions on work visa renewals. When my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and my mother needed care, I had to choose between my career in Dubai and my family responsibilities in Chicago." He gestured slightly toward his uniform. "The hotel industry offers flexible scheduling that allows me to care for my father during the day, while earning enough to support my family. Night shift maintenance work pays better than most people realize, and it's given me time to study for my CPA certification." The room processed this information in stunned silence. Here was a man with precisely the expertise that could have prevented 4 days of miscommunication and growing mistrust, and he had been changing light bulbs while they struggled with concepts he could have explained in minutes. Sheikh Al-Thani stood up slowly, his demeanor completely transformed. "Mr. Martinez," he said with newfound respect, "what specifically did you observe in our discussions that you believe has been mistranslated or misunderstood?" Daniel glanced at Marcus, as if seeking permission to continue. Marcus nodded numbly, still trying to process the complete reversal of everything he thought he knew about the situation. "Your Excellency," Daniel began, switching back to Arabic, "your primary concern, as I understood it, relates to the concept of gharar, excessive uncertainty in contractual obligations. The American side has been proposing performance benchmarks and penalty structures that, in Islamic commercial law, could be interpreted as gambling rather than legitimate business partnership." The Sheikh's eyes widened slightly. The concept of gharar was fundamental to Islamic finance, but it was nuanced and difficult to explain to Western business partners who didn't share the underlying philosophical framework. "Continue," the Sheikh said, now speaking Arabic as well. "The Americans, for their part," Daniel explained, "are operating under SEC regulations and fiduciary duty requirements that mandate certain performance metrics and risk mitigation strategies. What sounds like mistrust to you is actually legal obligation to their shareholders and regulatory bodies." He turned to address both sides of the room. "The issue isn't that either party is being unreasonable. The issue is that you're operating under 2 different legal and philosophical frameworks, and the translators, while competent in language, don't have the specialized knowledge to bridge those conceptual gaps." Marcus found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "You understood all of this? For 4 days you've known exactly what was going wrong?" Daniel met his gaze steadily. "Yes, sir. I understood that both sides were negotiating in good faith but talking past each other. The Sheikh's team was interpreting your contract language as evidence of mistrust and short-term thinking. Your team was interpreting their resistance as unwillingness to commit to measurable outcomes." Dr. Mitchell sank into her chair. "Both interpretations were wrong. Both interpretations were logical given the cultural and legal contexts each side was operating from," Daniel corrected gently. "In Islamic partnership principles, excessive focus on penalty structures can undermine the fundamental trust that should characterize business relationships. In American corporate law, failure to specify performance metrics and consequences can expose executives to legal liability." Sheikh Al-Thani exchanged a rapid conversation in Arabic with his advisors. Marcus caught fragments, words of surprise, recognition, and what sounded like approval. When the Sheikh turned back to the room, his entire posture had changed. "Mr. Martinez," he said, "would you be willing to help us understand how these different approaches might be reconciled?" Daniel checked the time on his simple digital watch. "Your Excellency, I'm scheduled to complete maintenance rounds on 3 more floors before my shift ends. However, if Mr. Richardson and hotel management are agreeable, I could arrange coverage for my duties and assist with clarifying these communication issues." Marcus realized that everyone in the room was looking at him. The most important business negotiation of his career had just been diagnosed by a man he had never truly seen despite his presence for 4 days. A man whose expertise exceeded that of the expensive consultants and translators he had hired. "Mr. Martinez," Marcus said, his voice carrying a humility that had been absent from his tone for decades, "would you be willing to help us save this deal?" Daniel nodded once, decisively. "I believe this project could be transformational for clean energy development, Mr. Richardson, both for American innovation and Middle Eastern investment principles. I'd be honored to help facilitate better communication between your teams." As Daniel reached for his radio to call his supervisor about coverage for his remaining duties, Sheikh Al-Thani turned to Marcus with an expression that mixed amazement with mild reproach. "Mr. Richardson," he said quietly, "in my country we have a saying. The treasure is often guarded by those who seem to have the least. Perhaps this is a lesson for both of us about the value of paying attention to all the people in our world." 6 hours later, the atmosphere in the Imperial Suite had undergone a complete metamorphosis. Where tension and frustration had dominated for 4 days, genuine collaboration now flourished. Daniel Martinez sat at the head of the conference table, no longer in his maintenance uniform, but in a borrowed dress shirt and tie that Dr. Mitchell had hastily arranged from the hotel's concierge service. The transformation was remarkable, not just in Daniel's appearance but in the entire dynamic of the room. Sheikh Al-Thani was leaning forward, actively engaged in technical discussions about Islamic finance structures. Marcus Richardson was taking notes. Actually taking notes. As Daniel explained concepts that could revolutionize how Western companies approached Middle Eastern partnerships. The key insight, Daniel was explaining, is that Islamic partnership principles and American corporate governance requirements aren't contradictory. They're complementary if structured correctly. The Sheikh's concerns about Gharar can be addressed through profit-sharing mechanisms rather than penalty structures, which actually aligns better with sustainable business practices anyway. Robert Chen, who had spent 4 days growing increasingly frustrated with legal complexities, was now nodding enthusiastically. So instead of penalizing underperformance, we create shared incentive structures that reward overperformance. Exactly, Daniel confirmed. In Islamic commercial law, partnerships should benefit all parties when they succeed, rather than punishing parties when they struggle. This approach actually reduces risk for everyone because it encourages collaborative problem-solving rather than defensive positioning. Sheikh Al-Thani addressed his chief advisor in Arabic, and Daniel could see the older man's expressions shift from skepticism to genuine interest. When the Sheikh turned back to the group, his tone carried an excitement that had been completely absent from the previous days. "Mr. Martinez," the Sheikh said, "this restructuring you've proposed, where renewable energy profits are shared based on actual environmental impact rather than arbitrary financial benchmarks. This is precisely the kind of long-term thinking that our fund seeks to support." Marcus felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced in years. Not just professional satisfaction, but genuine pride in being part of something innovative and meaningful. "Daniel, how quickly could we restructure the existing framework to incorporate these principles?" "The core legal structure is already sound," Daniel replied, reviewing the documents spread across the table. "We're really talking about reframing the language and adjusting the performance metrics. Instead of focusing on penalty avoidance, we focus on shared success multipliers. Instead of quarterly profit targets, we establish 5-year environmental impact goals with escalating reward structures." Dr. Mitchell, who had been quietly taking notes, looked up with an expression of amazement. "This could become a model for international sustainable development partnerships. The structure you're describing addresses compliance requirements for both American corporate law and Islamic finance principles, while actually improving the project's long-term viability." Daniel nodded. That's the beauty of finding common ground between different systems. Often the synthesis is stronger than either approach alone. As the evening progressed, Daniel facilitated detailed discussions that resolved every major point of contention that had threatened the deal. His unique perspective allowed him to translate not just language but entire conceptual frameworks, helping both sides understand that their goals were fundamentally aligned. By midnight, they had preliminary agreement on a revolutionary partnership structure that would serve as a template for future international clean energy investments. The $6.2 billion project was not only saved, it was transformed into something better than either side had originally envisioned. Sheikh Al-Thani stood and addressed the room with formal dignity. "I propose we conclude tonight's session and reconvene tomorrow to finalize the documentation. However, before we adjourn, I have a proposal for Mr. Martinez." Daniel looked up, still somewhat amazed to find himself at the center of such momentous negotiations. "Our investment fund is establishing a new division focused specifically on Sharia-compliant renewable energy partnerships with Western companies," the Sheikh continued. "We require someone who understands both worlds, Islamic finance principles and American business practices. Would you consider joining our team as Director of Cross-Cultural Investment Strategy?" The offer hung in the air like a gift from an alternate universe. Daniel felt the weight of possibility, but also the weight of responsibility. "Your Excellency, I am deeply honored by your confidence. However, I have family obligations that require me to remain in Chicago." "The position would be based in our Chicago office," the Sheikh replied with a slight smile. "We've been planning to establish a Midwest presence specifically to oversee this project and similar investments. The salary would be $250,000 annually, with performance bonuses tied to successful project completion." Daniel's composure finally cracked slightly. That salary was more than 5 times what he earned in hotel maintenance, enough to provide excellent care for his father and transform his family's circumstances entirely. Marcus, who had been watching this exchange with growing concern about losing Daniel's expertise to the other side of the negotiation, cleared his throat. Sheikh, if I may, Richardson Energy would also be very interested in discussing a position with Mr. Martinez. We're creating a new division for international partnerships, and we need someone who can navigate these complex cultural and regulatory frameworks. For a moment, Daniel found himself at the center of a polite bidding war between two of the most powerful business leaders he'd ever encountered. 6 hours earlier, he had been invisible to both men. Now they were competing for his services. "Gentlemen," Daniel said diplomatically, "I appreciate both opportunities more than you can imagine. However, might I suggest a different approach? This project succeeds because it brings together American innovation and Middle Eastern investment principles. What if we structured my role to serve both organizations? I could work as an independent consultant, facilitating communication and ensuring cultural alignment throughout the project's development." Sheikh Al-Thani and Marcus exchanged a look that held the beginnings of genuine partnership rather than mere business cooperation. "A joint position," Marcus mused, "shared compensation, shared responsibilities, reporting to both organizations. It would demonstrate our commitment to genuine partnership," the Sheikh agreed. "And Mr. Martinez would have the autonomy to ensure both sides remain aligned with the project's larger purpose." 3 months later, Daniel Martinez stood in a corner office on the 38th floor of a gleaming Chicago skyscraper, looking out at Lake Michigan while reviewing environmental impact reports for the largest clean energy project in Midwest history. His title was Director of Cross-Cultural Partnership Development for the Richardson Al-Thani Renewable Energy Initiative, and his work was already attracting attention from international development organizations worldwide. On his desk sat a framed photo of his father, taken on one of his good days when the Alzheimer's symptoms were less severe. Next to it was a handwritten note from Sheikh Al-Thani that read, "To Daniel Martinez, who reminded us that wisdom often comes from the most unexpected places." But Daniel's favorite possession in the office was something much simpler. His old hotel maintenance name tag, now mounted in a small frame with an inscription he had written himself, "Never underestimate the invisible people." His phone buzzed with a text from his mother. "Your father had a great day today. He remembered your name and asked about your important work with the wind machines. The new care facility is wonderful. Thank you for making this possible." Daniel smiled and returned to his reports. Through the window, he could see construction cranes on the horizon, already beginning work on the first phase of wind installations that would power nearly 3 million homes with clean energy. That evening, as Daniel prepared to leave the office, he noticed the night maintenance crew beginning their rounds. An older Hispanic woman was emptying trash bins, working with the same quiet efficiency Daniel remembered from his own hotel days. As she passed his office, he caught her attention. "Excuse me," he said in Spanish. "I'm Daniel Martinez. I work on the renewable energy project. How long have you been with the building services?" The woman seemed surprised, but pleased to be addressed directly by someone in a business suit. 3 years, sir. I'm Maria Gonzalez." "What did you do before this job, Maria?" She straightened with evident pride. "I was an elementary school teacher in Mexico for 15 years. But when we came to Chicago, my credentials didn't transfer, and my English wasn't strong enough for the classroom." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Are you still interested in education? We're going to need community liaison specialists to explain the clean energy project to local schools and neighborhoods. Someone who understands how to communicate complex ideas to diverse audiences." Maria's eyes widened with surprise and hope. "It would mean daytime hours, working with children and families, and using your teaching skills to help communities understand how renewable energy will benefit them," Daniel continued. "Would you be interested in hearing more about it?" As Daniel walked to his car that night, he reflected on the strange turns life could take. 6 months ago, he had been invisible, maintaining hotel systems while highly educated people conducted important business around him. Tonight, he was creating opportunities for other invisible people to step into the light. The millionaire Sheikh had spoken in Arabic, and only the maid, or in this case, the maintenance worker, had truly heard him. But the real miracle wasn't in the hearing. It was in what happened next, when people finally learned to see each other clearly. In a world full of invisible people doing essential work while harboring untold stories and unrealized potential, Daniel Martinez had become living proof that recognition and opportunity could transform not just individual lives, but entire industries. And somewhere in Chicago, other maintenance workers, hotel staff, and service employees continued their invisible work, carrying their own stories of expertise, dreams, and possibilities, waiting for the moment when someone would finally see them as they truly were. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.